All right, welcome everyone. I'm just going to quickly go over the guidelines, but most of you should be familiar with it now. All participants will join the meeting with muted microphones. Please rename yourself to include your first name, last name, and affiliation. Please do not unmute and mute yourself. To participate in the discussion, please select the raise hand function. Find this by clicking on the participants button at the bottom of the screen, and a window will pop up with a raise hand button at the bottom. The presenters will then call on participants and unmute their microphones. If you're on the phone, you can use *9 to raise your hand. If you have any technical difficulties at all, please contact Roisin Foley via the chat box at rfoley@ctps.org or 857-702-3704. Okay.
You want to just do a quick run through of the accessibility statement?
Oh, sorry. No, sorry. This meeting is accessible to people with disabilities. Zoom products are compliant with exceptions with the following standards: Web Content Accessibility Guidelines 2.1 Level AA standards and revised Section 508 standards. If you require any additional accommodations and in order to participate fully in the meeting, please contact Roisin Foley, MPO staff at rfoley@ctps.org or 857-702-3704. Thanks, Matt. All right, so we are on to agenda item 1, which are introductions. So Matt, I assume you're going to do the roll, or is it Jonathan?
I'll do the roll.
All right, go ahead, Jonathan.
Yep, Massdot Chair.
Steve Wolfer, representing Acting Secretary and CEO of Massdot, Jamie Tesler, here.
Massdot C2.
John Bouchard, representing Highway Administrator Jonathan Gulliver.
Massdot Highway Division. Okay, MBTA.
Jillian Linnell, representing General Manager Steve Poftak.
Massachusetts Port Authority. Metropolitan Area Planning Council.
Good morning. This is Eric Barassa with the Metropolitan Area Planning Council.
MBTA Advisory Board.
Morning, everybody. Brian Kane, MBTA Advisory Board, present.
Regional Transportation Advisory Council.
Howdy, folks. Leonard Diggins, Advisory Council here.
City of Boston, Boston Transportation Department.
Tom Katzis, City of Boston, representing Mayor Kim Janey.
City of Boston, BPDA.
Hey, Jim Fitzgerald with BPDA, representing Mayor Janey with the City of Boston.
Great. At-large City of Everett. Okay, at-large City of Newton.
David Kozas, representing Mayor Ruth Ann Fuller in the City of Newton.
At-large Town of Arlington.
This is Daniel Amstutz, Town of Arlington, representing Select Board Chair John Hurd and MPO area towns.
At-large Town of Brookline.
Todd Corrine, representing Select Board Chair Bernard Green in the Town of Brookline.
Intercore Committee, City of Somerville. I think somebody can unmute Mr. Tom.
Okay, sorry. Tom Bent, City of Somerville, representing Mayor Joe Curtatone in the Intercore.
Minuteman Advisory Group on Interlocal Coordination, Town of Acton. Metro West Regional Collaborative, City of Framingham.
Thatcher Keyser, representing Mayor Spicer.
North Shore Task Force, City of Beverly.
Darlene Wynn, representing Mayor Cahill for the City of Beverly.
South Shore Coalition, Town of Rockland.
Jen Constable, Rockland, representing South Shore Coalition.
Southwest Advisory Planning Committee, Town of Medway.
Town of Medway, Pete Pelletier.
Thank you. Three Rivers Interlocal Council, Town of Norwood, Neponset River Regional Chamber.
Good morning, Tom O'Rourke from the Town of Norwood, representing the Trick subregion.
Thank you. And our ex officio members, Federal Highway Administration.
Good morning, Ken Miller, Federal Highway.
And Federal Transit Administration. That calls the roll, Mr. Chair.
Jonathan, I believe we missed NSPC.
Oh, I'm so sorry. North Suburban Planning Council, City of Woburn. My bad.
That's all right. I'm here. Tina Cassidy, representing Woburn Mayor Scott Galvin and the NSPC. Thank you.
Thank you. That now calls the roll, Mr. Chair.
Thanks, Jonathan. Thanks, everyone. And again, welcome. I do have a chair's report. As members know that there's been work to develop an ad hoc committee to look at the TIP and project overruns. I'm happy to say that has been put together. Eric Barassa of MAPC will be chairing that committee. There are 10 MPO members who are currently have been selected to be on that committee. All of the meetings that Eric will be chairing and that group will be hosting will be public meetings. And as I mentioned before, and what we've talked about for a while, that committee will focus on attempting to develop a policy to bring back to the full membership on how to deal with project cost overruns. It is anticipated the first meeting of the committee will be in late May, and that we anticipate probably late summer, early fall, the committee being done with its work. And the idea is, as I said, the committee will provide a recommendation to the MPO board regarding any policy changes. That group is planning on having that, or we're hoping and anticipating that happening around late summer of 2021. And then once that recommendation comes out, there will be, we're also anticipating a 30-day public comment period on that recommendation. So just wanted to give you an update on that. Any questions on that? I'm sure Eric will be in touch shortly to set up the meeting for the selected members. All right. With that, I will move to the Executive Director's report. Tegan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and welcome everyone. First and foremost, I would just like to again thank you all for your commitment and attendance, especially given that this is now the 4th meeting over 4 weeks. So that's unusual for us. And so just to the board, to the project proponents, to the public, and especially also to staff, thank you for working through these very, very busy weeks. We very much appreciate it. So what I wanted to make a few comments on outreach that is still ongoing, even with as busy as we have been. So I wanted to thank those of you who joined us yesterday for what was our spring Intercore Committee Transportation meeting. We had discussions that were really robust and great around improving safety, performance, Vision Zero, and resilient transportation. So climate resiliency. So it was great, thank you. And we're very much looking forward to the next one. I'm also excited to announce that we will be hosting a virtual event called The History of the Mbta Spider Map with our CTPS's expert cartographer, Ken Dumas, who has been with us for a very long time and has been the Mbta map designer for over 30 years. He's incredibly engaging, and I think this is a really fun topic. So I hope some of you all can join us. It will be on Friday, April 30th at 3 p.m. So more details will be released soon and posted on the calendar, so keep an eye out. In addition, upcoming, we will have 2 virtual TIP open houses on May 10th and May 19th. And again, we'll post more information about that on the MPO calendar. So for today, we will have, so staff are now really working on developing the document that's going to be released for public review, the TIP Federal Fiscal Year 22 through 26 Transportation Improvement Program. So we'll be focusing on some different things today, which I hope will be a bit of a relief. We'll have 3 work scopes. 2 of them are not funded by the MPO planning funds. And just as a reminder, you vote on those work scopes because they do take staff time and commitment. And so you're asked to sort of consider and approve that time and commitment we put towards the projects. They're also often projects that are of interest to the board since they're significant for the region and or for stakeholders on the MPO or related to the MPO. So we'll present 3 of those. One of them is funded by MPO planning funds. And then in addition, we have 2 substantive items. One is a discussion about transit safety performance targets. We'll have staff both from the MPO, but also from Mbta, presenting and introducing you to what is a new performance area for the MPO. So you'll be asked to take a vote on an initial set of targets in that area today. And then we'll also have a presentation from John Bouchard from the Highway Division on how the Massdot highway projects are selected for funding in the TIP. And just as a reminder, this is relevant because when the state uses the federal funding for these kinds of highway projects, the board has the authority to vote to approve the use of those federal funds. So with that, just want to make a comment about the next meeting date. We'll have a longer break before the next meeting. We're discussing whether or not it will be held on April 29th or May 6th. So please keep in mind and hold those 2 Thursdays if you can. This primarily has to do with the fact that we're still discussing the appropriate date for the release for the federal fiscal year 22 to 26 TIP for public comment. So we'll keep you informed and we will definitely let you know once a final decision has been made. So keep an eye out in your email, the calendar for that final decision. And that is it, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Tegan. Any questions for Tegan? Okay, we'll move on to agenda item 4, public comments. Are there any members of the public who would like to address the MPO today? And as always, please try to give us your name and your affiliation. Matt, Jonathan, you seeing anyone who wants to make a comment today?
Tina has her hand raised.
Tina, go ahead.
Terribly sorry, I'm up for the next agenda item. My apologies.
I kind of thought that, Tina. Anyone else have any public comments? All right. I don't think we have any. So why don't we move on to agenda 5, which is community chairs reports. Tina, you have something?
Yes, I do. Thank you. Just wanted to give a brief update to everybody on behalf of myself and Brian Kane, who co-chair the Administration and Finance Committee, which met this morning. Just wanted to let you know we are covered with great assistance from Haral Gandhi, the Director of Operations and Finance, led us through an update on where expenses and revenues are at the moment. With about 3/4 of the fiscal year elapsed, about 2/3 of expenses have been spent and about 2/3 of the revenue have been received. So while that's a little bit under the place where we are in the fiscal year at 75%, they're still relatively equal. There's a difference of several $1,000s, but a gap that certainly is considered manageable at this point and one that they will watch going forward. The overhead target rate, which had been set as a goal of 106.0%, we're pretty much meeting right now. It is projected at the end of the fiscal year on June 30th to be at 106.21. So if that holds, we will pretty much meet that target. We talked a little bit about what the process is for the closing out of a fiscal year and the fact that there are 2, some funds are state fiscal year, some are federal. The expenses are being carefully watched and managed. They're talking about the process of returning personnel to the office. That process will be a gradual one over months that might start, toward the beginning of summer, end of spring. There's a lot of research that needs to be done. There's going to be some need for some equipment purchases, particularly laptops, and staff is doing significant work now to try to nail down the potential costs and expenses so that we can roll those into the budget, which will be discussed at a meeting in June. Talked a little bit about changes that are happening at the state office building that will affect staff, and the fact too that they are also working on a formal remote work policy that would be for the longer term use of staff. That still needs to be fleshed out, but it is something that's being worked on at the moment. The next meeting of the ANF committee will be on June 17th at 9 a.m. It will be posted on the MPO webpage for anybody who would like to join us. We'd encourage you to do that because we expect to have the draft operating budget for federal fiscal year 22 we'll be discussing that at that meeting, hopefully voting to recommend it out to the MPO for action on the same date. So thank you. And we would, as I said, both Mr. Kane and I would encourage anybody to join us who might be interested in this aspect of the work. Thanks.
Thanks, Tina. Any questions for Tina or Brian? I don't see any. Any other chair reports? Okay, I don't see that. So why don't we move on to the next agenda item, which is agenda item 6, the Regional Transportation Advisory Council report. Leonard.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We have not had a meeting since our last MPO meeting, but in this upcoming week, we will be having our 3C committee meeting. So for those of you who attend the next meeting, which is on the UPWP, if you don't have enough from that, you can join us for that 3C meeting, which will be on that topic, and we'll discuss that more at our meeting on next Wednesday at 2:30, along with Chapter 6 of the needs assessments from the last LRTP. Thank you.
Thanks, Leonard. Any questions for Leonard? All right, seeing none, we're on to agenda item 7, which is approval of meeting minutes. This is for March 4th. Could I get a motion, a second, to approve the minutes for March 4th? So I can't see whose hands are raised. Matt, do you know whose hands are raised?
Got Eric.
Eric, go ahead.
Hi, Eric Barassa here. I make a motion to approve the minutes of March 4th.
And Matt, who is the presumed
And
second?
Tina.
Tina, go ahead.
And Tina Cassidy would happily second that motion.
All right. Any comments or questions on the minutes? Okay, I don't see any. So Jonathan, please read the roll.
My apologies. Steve Wolfle,
Yes.
John Bouchard,
John Bouchard, yes.
Jillian Linnell,
Jillian Linnell, yes.
Eric Barassa,
Eric Barassa, yes.
Brian Kane,
Kane, yes.
Leonard Diggins,
Leonard Diggins, yes.
Tom Kadzis,
Kadzis, yes.
Jim Fitzgerald,
Jim Fitz, yes.
David Kozis,
David Kozis, yes.
Daniel Amstutz,
Daniel Amstutz, yes.
Todd Corain,
Todd Corain, yes.
Tom Bent,
Tom Bent, yes.
Thatcher Keyser,
Thatcher Keyser votes yes.
Darlene Wynn,
Darlene Wynn votes yes.
Tina Cassidy,
Tina Cassidy votes yes.
Jennifer Constable,
Jennifer Constable abstains.
Peter Pelletier,
Peter Pelletier, yes.
and Tom O'Rourke.
Tom O'Rourke, yes.
Motion carries, Mr. Chair.
All right, thank you, everyone. So we're on to our next agenda item, which is agenda item 8. It's the federal fiscal year 2021 to 2025 TIP Amendment 3. Matt, go ahead.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, everyone. Today I'm here with a brief presentation on Amendment 3 to the federal fiscal years 2021 through 2025 Transportation Improvement Program. We first discussed Amendment 3 at the MPO meeting on March 4th, after which point it was released for a 21-day public comment period. The comment period closed last Thursday, April 1st, and no comments were received during that time. Before taking a vote, I want to recap the amendments of the contents of the proposed amendment. Amendment 3 makes adjustments to 4 Metro West Regional Transit Authority projects, all of which are currently programmed in federal fiscal year 2021, which is the current federal fiscal year. These changes are detailed on this slide and are also available on the MPO's meeting calendar for your review. Taking these in order, the first two projects listed here, improvements to the Framingham commuter rail station and technology support and capital outreach, are proposed to have their funding levels reduced in fiscal year 2021 by $275,000 and $130,000 respectively. These changes are being made to align MWRTA's 2021 programming with their federally approved project list for this fiscal year. The third project listed here, MWRTA's Front Entrance Blandon project, is proposed to have an adjustment made to its funding sources. MWRTA has roughly $105,000 in federal fiscal year 2018 funding that is set to lapse at the end of this fiscal year. So in order to utilize those funds, MWRTA is allocating them to this project and making a reduction of the same amount in the RTA capital assistance funds allocated to the project. Finally, MWRTA's 5339 replacement vehicles program has a proposed reduction in funding of $537,600. This change is being made because MWRTA has elected to defer some federal fiscal year 2021 replacement vehicle purchases to fiscal 22 based on the reduced usage of their fleet over the last year, as well as the current availability of replacement vehicles under contract. That's all I have in Amendment 3. So with that, I will turn it back over to the chair for questions and a vote on the amendment.
All right, thanks, Matt. Can I get a motion and a second to approve Amendment 3, and then I'll open up to questions anyone has for Matt?
Brian Kane.
Go ahead, Brian.
So moved, Mr. Chairman.
All right. Second.
And Thatcher Keyser.
Go ahead, Thatcher.
I will second that motion.
All right, thank you. Are there any questions for Matt? Okay. Jonathan, please read the roll.
Steve Wolfle,
Yes.
John Bouchard,
John Bouchard, yes.
Jillian Linnell,
Yes.
Eric Barassa,
Eric Barassa, yes.
Brian Kane,
Brian Kane, yes.
Leonard Diggins,
Leonard Diggins, yes.
Tom Kadzis,
Kads is yes.
Jim Fitzgerald,
Yes.
David Kozis,
David Kozis, yes.
Daniel Amstutz,
Daniel Amstutz, yes.
Todd Corain,
Todd Corain, yes.
Tom Bent,
Tom Bent, yes.
Thatcher Keyser,
Thatcher Keyser votes yes.
Darlene Wynn,
Darlene Wynn votes yes.
Tina Cassidy,
Tina Cassidy votes yes.
Jennifer Constable,
Jennifer Constable, yes.
Peter Pelletier,
Peter Pelletier, yes.
and Tom O'Rourke.
Tom O'Rourke, yes.
Motion carries unanimously, Mr. Chair.
All right, thank you, Jonathan. Thank you, Matt. Thank you, everyone, for that. So we are going to move on to action item, or agenda item 9, which is an action item. It's the first of our 3 work scopes taken talked about. It's federal fiscal year 2020 to 2021 low-cost improvements to express highway bottlenecks. Mark, I believe you're up, correct?
Yes, I am. Thank you, Steve. Good morning, everyone. I'm here to present the work scope for the low-cost improvements to express highway bottleneck locations. This work program is about low-cost improvements study that we have been conducting biannually. We have conducted the study 5 times previously and studied 15 locations, all of which were well received by Massdot and Federal Highway. And also we have received positive feedback from the MPO board on these studies. Many of the recommendations have been implemented successfully. Examples are the 2-lane exits and reconfiguration of travel lanes on I-95 northbound and southbound, at I-90 in Weston, and at I-95 and Route 3 northbound ramp merges in Burlington and Lexington. There is a significant opportunity for the application of low-cost infrastructure solutions to bring about relief at bottleneck locations. Low-cost improvements to express highway bottleneck location study explores and focuses on this idea. The objectives of the study is to identify as many as 3 express highway bottleneck segments or points for study. Once we've determined the locations, we'll identify and recommend the low-cost improvements for the selected bottleneck locations. There are 4 tasks associated with the study. In task 1, MPO staff will develop an initial list of candidate locations for screening by contacting Massdot, Highway Division, Massdot OTP, and others for suggestions about bottleneck locations for study. In task 2, MPO staff will screen the candidate locations, determine locations that will likely be corrected with low-cost mitigation strategies, since not all the bottleneck locations can be corrected with some low-cost solutions. Many of them require much higher costs than what we normally recommend. In task 3, staff will evaluate the low-cost improvements. They will apply methodologies from the Highway Capacity Manual to analyze the bottlenecks and recommend low-cost improvements. Staff will then seek input from Massdot Highway Division staff who are familiar with the region's express highway system and make sure that our improvements meet with their guidance as well. In task 4, MPO staff will document the results of the study and provide a final document for presentation to the MPO and also to Massdot Highway Division. Funding for this study is 3C and has a budget of $64,500. And the study meets the MPO goals of safety, capacity management, mobility, safety preservation, and economic vitality. Thank you. I'm open for questions.
All right, can I get a motion, a second, to approve the scope, and then I'll open up to questions, any questions that people have for Mark?
Daniel,
good?
Daniel Amstutz, move approval of the work scope.
Okay. Matt, can you see who the second hand is?
Brian Kane.
Brian, go ahead.
Second.
All right, does anyone have any questions for Mark? Daniel, go ahead, unless you were just, do you have a question, Daniel?
Oh, sorry, I was trying to lower my hand.
Oh, all right. Leonard, do you have a question? Looks like you are.
Yes, Mr. Chair, thanks. And so you had said something about the cost. Sometimes the projects or something, the cost of them are more than you recommend. Did I hear you say something about a mismatch?
Yeah, we try typically recommend low cost improvements, which is, for an interchange, it could be, up to, $100,000 or more. We're not looking to do real dramatic physical geometric changes at these locations to improve it, because that will just bump up the cost, well above what we determine for low cost. We try to make sure we do mostly with painting and striping, with some occasional widening if necessary in the shoulder work type of things. But we stay away from major geometric changes.
I see. And so, but then sometimes the project that's requested is not low cost, is what you're saying?
Yeah, sometimes we'll go through and we'll get recommendations at different locations, and we'll do, some of our work in our initial screening to make sure that the location we're looking at, we can come up with some low cost improvements that would help the location. If we determine that, what's needed here is, a higher cost, more intensive work, we won't study that as part of the study.
I got you.
It doesn't mean that.
Go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
It doesn't mean there's nothing wrong with that location. It just means that it doesn't really fit the criteria for this study we're working on.
I got you. So I'm curious as to you think you'll be able to determine bottlenecks, at the same way you did before the pandemic?
Yeah, I mean, we'll be using our index data set to determine different locations, and we're also getting feedback from all the Massdot district offices as well. They keep an eye on what's going on with their roadways pretty keenly, so they can provide us with feedback on possible locations.
Okay. And the final question is, so we know that the projects that were implemented, did alleviate these bottlenecks. What was that? You said we've done these studies before, and I saw evidence of that. And some of the projects that were recommended were implemented, and so we do know that they alleviated bottlenecks. Yes, they were well received, and we haven't done a follow-up study on them, but they worked, and the initial feedback we received from Massdot was very positive. And even the one that I think we had one at the one I talked about at I-95 in Lexington and Burlington, we actually got a public comment letter back saying that they were a very improved location and that they were happy with the improvement. Thank you very much.
All right. Anyone else have questions? Mark.
Daniel, you have your hand raised again.
Yes, this time I do have a question. I'll just sort of follow up on what Len was saying. It's a curious question. I don't know if you've done this for previous studies, but have you found, or would you find locations where you can make low cost suggestions, but have you made, or would you make suggestions on whether like a specific location that you've studied should be looked at for bigger improvements? Like you can make low cost improvements now, but you might study it to do some larger or more long-term improvements later. Is that part of it?
If it's a location that we look at, we do that as well. We'll go through and identify the short-term, low-cost type of improvements, and then if there's something that we think that might be more helpful, that's more of a longer-term improvement, we'll include that in our study as well.
Okay, great. Thank you.
All right. Anyone else have any questions? Matt, any other hands raised? I can't see any.
Seeing none.
Okay. All right. So, Jonathan, can you please read the roll?
Steve Wolfo,
Yes.
John Bouchard,
John Bouchard, yes.
Jillian Linnell,
Yes.
Eric Barassa,
Eric Barassa, yes.
Brian Kane,
Kane, yes.
Leonard Diggins,
Leonard Diggins, yes.
Tom Kazis,
Yes.
Jim Fitzgerald,
Gerald, yes.
David Kozis.
David Kozis, yes.
Daniel Amstutz.
Daniel Amstutz, yes.
Todd Corain,
Todd Corain, yes.
Tom Bent,
Tom Benton, yes.
Thatcher Keyser,
Bachikiza votes yes.
Darlene Nguyen,
Darlene Nguyen votes yes.
Tina Cassidy,
Tina Cassidy votes yes.
Jennifer Constable,
Jennifer Constable votes yes.
Peter Pelletier,
Peter Pelletier votes yes.
and Tom O'Rourke.
Tom O'Rourke, yes.
Motion carries, Mr. Chair, unanimously.
All right. Thank you. And thank you, Mark. We'll move on to agenda item 10, which is the work scope for the Dorchester Bay City Redevelopment DEIR. That's Drashti. So Drashti, why don't you go ahead?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, everyone. My name is Drashti Joshi, and I work in Child Model Applications Group as a modeler at CTPS. This work scope is for a DEIR modeling support study for the Dorchester Bay City Redevelopment Project. In December 2020, the MPO certificate for the Dorchester Bay City project outlined the Commonwealth's requested scope of work for the required DEIR. The MPO scoping certificate recommended that the developer work with CTPS as it develops the DEIR. The objective of this modeling study is to provide insight into potential impacts on the transportation system resulting from the proposed Dorchester Bay City development using trial demand model forecast. This work will provide the foundation to submit a MPO impact study document. This is a non-MPO funded study and is only for the tasks that CTPS will be completing for this study. We at CTPS will conduct a modeling DEIR support study similar to the ones we have conducted for the other major land use development studies in the past. CTPS will model total 4 scenarios, and the results from these scenarios will provide Massdot and stakeholders with insight into the potential impacts of Dorchester Bay City development on the transportation system. This study will be conducted for the base and LRTP 2040 future year conditions and will be focused on peak period analysis. This study is expected to take approximately 6 months and is budgeted at $94,500. With that, I will turn it to Mr. Chair to open this for any questions.
Great. Thanks, Rusty. Can I get a motion, a second, to approve this work scope, and then I'll open up to questions? So Eric, see your hand raised.
I make a motion to approve this Dorchester Bay City redevelopment DEIR modeling support work study.
All right, Matt, who's the second hand raised? Oh, Tina, go ahead, Tina.
And I would second that motion.
All right, anyone have any questions for Rusty? Leonard, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And this is maybe a question for you and perhaps Eric Barassa from MEPC and maybe Ann McGann. I'm just trying to understand, get a sense of how these kind of things factor into our thinking about the LRTP. So my question is, was this kind of project, a possibilities kind of project, this is like 1,700 units, residential units, it's huge. Was that kind of factored into a possibility when we were thinking about land use, when thinking about the LRTP and how we model for future development?
So, Eric, I'm assuming you might want to chime in this. Leonard, David's been doing this project more than me. I only know about it and only came to know about it a couple months ago. So I really can't talk about any spares. Eric, do you have any sense, or Ann?
Yeah, so when we put together the demographics that are used for the RTP that CTPS then does the modeling at the regional level for, when we create those land use demographics, population, employment, housing units, all of that information, which is sort of the foundation for the travel modeling. We work really closely with all the municipalities. We have a database. It's actually a website called Mass Builds, where we really encourage people to put as much information in as possible. And we assume a certain amount of development that's going to be absorbed, kind of across the region. And we work really closely with Boston, with Jim Fitzgerald and folks at BPTA about the growth that's going to occur in Boston. We do discount all of the growth to some extent, so it's probably never as much as every single municipality thinks it will totally be. But that being said, for this body of work, we are working. There was a meeting, I believe, or there is a meeting coming up where we are actually working with Boston to actually refine some of the analysis on development for this body of work.
Gotcha. So I was just seeing if Ann was maybe going to chime in. I got you. So just a quick little follow-up. So it's kind of generally like in the aggregate, though, right? You're not like saying in a particular area we might get a big development and that could have certain kinds of impacts.
So Len, you probably know this. So the travel model, right, breaks up our region into 2,700, almost 3,000 transportation analysis zones. And so at every single zone, and obviously the zones in the city of Boston are a lot smaller, and as you go out into our less dense regions, they're larger geographically speaking. That's where we put population, employment, in the zone level, right? That's what, so we do, we are estimating what we think, we are forecasting what growth is, in these, in these small, transportation analysis zone geographies.
Gotcha. All right, thank you.
All right, any other questions anyone has? It looks like there's a couple more names, but I can't tell who's up. Matt, who's next? you think?
Anne might have a comment here.
Ann, go ahead.
I just wanted to add, what Eric had said is right. They look at the mass build sites and the projects that are coming up, but I also wanted to add that that's why we update the plan every 4 years, and we will be starting that process beginning this year to start looking at the demographics that will go into the next plan. And I believe at that point, they'll look at the developments again that are proposed, and look at the allocations at that point.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
And then also Jim Fitzgerald.
Jim, go ahead.
Yeah, just to try to, answer what Len's asking a little more specifically, since I am, as Eric alluded to, have been in the weeds on, land use projections with Eric and his colleagues. So for this area specifically, what is an LRTP and has been accounted for is some of the growth we projected with the Columbia Point Master Plan, which this project site is located within it. But really, I think that's the reason for doing this work. Now that we have a specific development proposal with specific breakdowns of land uses and units and stuff, more details on what is essentially trying to get built there. This is why we're doing this work, is to refine those numbers a little more accurately now that we know at least what the developer wants to do, and kind of rerun some analysis working with CTPS. So that's really the point of this work. But yes, to answer your question, there is some, decent amount of growth that's already in the LRTP land use assumptions based on the Columbia Point Master Plan work that we had done a few years back.
Thank you very much. And of course, I'm all for this. Appreciate it.
Okay. Other hands raised, Matt?
I believe that is all.
All right. With that, Jonathan, why don't you read the roll?
Steve Woeful,
Yes.
John Bouchard,
John Bouchard, yes.
Jillian Linnell,
Yes.
Eric Barassa,
Eric Barassa, yes.
Brian Kane,
Brian Kane, yes.
Leonard Diggins,
Leonard Diggins, yes.
Tom Katzis,
Tom Katzis, yes. Thank you.
Jim Fitzgerald,
Jim Fitzgerald, yes.
David Kozis,
David Kozis, yes.
Daniel Amstutz,
Daniel Amstutz, yes.
Todd Corain,
Todd Corain, yes.
Tom Bent,
Tom Benton, yes.
Thatcher Keyser,
Thatcher Keyser votes yes.
Darlene Wynn,
Darlene Wynn votes yes.
Tina Cassidy,
Tina Cassidy votes yes.
Jennifer Constable,
Jennifer Constable, yes.
Peter Pelletier,
Peter Pelletier, yes.
and Tom O'Rourke.
Tom O'Rourke, yes.
Motion carries unanimously.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Josh T. All right, we're on to action, agenda item 11, action on work scope, MBTA map support. Mr. Dumas, why don't you take the floor, please?
Good morning. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yeah, we can hear you, Ken.
Okay, I'm just trying out a new headset here, so I want to make sure it actually works. So good morning, everybody, and thanks to the MPO board for letting me speak with you today. So yes, my name is Ken Dumas. I'm a senior graphic artist cartographer here at CTPS, and I'm here to propose to submit a work scope for the continuation of MPO mapping support. For the past couple of decades now, the CTPS has been responsible for many of the MBTA's maps, including such things as the system map, the rapid transit map, all of the bus maps, commuter rail maps, neighborhood maps, and even some specific unique temporary maps showing, like, for instance, detours or short-term changes in service. As you can imagine, these maps need to be updated occasionally over time. A more recent example would be that just recently, a few weeks ago, the MBTA had some reduction in service. And in the summer, much of that service is going to be restored. And each time this happens, many maps have to be updated to represent what's currently going on. And essentially, that is what this work scope is for. Whenever these incidents occur, they tend to be brief. Though they are sporadic, they are often. And so this work scope is for $18,000 over a 36-month period. The MPO had approved a similar work scope in 2018, which contracts ends this June 30th. And essentially, this will be an extension of that work. Thank you.
All right, thanks for that, Ken. Can I get a motion, a second to approve, then I'll open up to any questions people have for Ken. So Leonard.
I motion to approve.
All right. Is there a second?
Brian Kane.
Brian, go ahead.
Second.
All right, any questions for Ken? And don't ask him any questions about his upcoming event. We don't want to have any spoilers right now, all right? All right, I don't see any questions for you, Ken, so why don't we call the roll, Jonathan?
Steve Wolfel,
Yes.
John Bouchard,
John Bouchard, yes.
Jillian Linnell,
Yes.
Eric Barassa,
Eric Barassa, yes.
Brian Kane,
Yes.
Leonard Diggins,
Leonard Diggins, yes.
Tom Kadzis,
Yes, Kansas.
Jim Fitzgerald,
Gerald, yes.
David Kozis,
David Kozis, yes.
Daniel Amstutz,
Dean Lamstutz, yes.
Todd Corain,
Todd Corain, yes.
Tom Bent,
Tom Bent, yes.
Thatcher Keyser,
Thatcher Keyser votes yes.
Darlene Wynn,
Darlene Wynn votes yes.
Tina Cassidy,
Tina Cassidy votes yes.
Jennifer Constable,
Jennifer Constable, yes.
Peter Pelletier,
Peter Pelletier, yes.
and Tom O'Rourke.
Tom O'Rourke, yes.
Motion carries unanimously, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Ken.
Thank you.
We're on to agenda item 12, which is the an action item, transit safety performance targets. Michelle, you're up. I guess with Master D. Donato from MBTA.
Hey, thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, everyone. My name is Michelle Scott. I'm a member of MPO staff, and this morning I'm joined by Matthew D. Donato, who is the Deputy Director of Safety and Oversight at the MBTA, and we'll be going over some material related to transit safety performance targets. Next slide, please. As I typically do at the beginning of these performance-oriented presentations, I have a couple of key highlights I hope you'll come away with. The first is that the purpose, the FTA requires transit agencies to create safety plans to implement safety management systems, which is a new approach designed to improve transportation across the nation's transportation systems. Related to these requirements, transit agencies and MPOs must set performance targets for federally established transit safety measures. So we're going to be walking through the targets for 3 agencies today, the MBTA, the Cape Ann Transportation Authority, or CATA, and the Metro West Regional Transit Authority, or MWRTA. Our staff recommendation is that the MPO adopts the transit agency safety targets as presented as an initial set for the Boston region. And as with other performance areas, the opportunity that comes here is for the MPO to start in more detail considering transit safety performance when reviewing capital programming for the Transportation Improvement Program. There are some materials for this presentation that are available on the April 8th page of the MPO meeting calendar. They include a memo that summarizes the targets for the 3 agencies, as well as detailed agency safety plans for each agency. And we'll talk a little bit more about the presentation during the presentation about what those are. Next slide, please. Just for the overview, I'm going to give a few brief comments about the MPO's general performance-based planning and programming process. I'll also give a very high-level description of the transit safety performance requirements, and then turn it over to Matthew to talk about some of the MBTA's safety-oriented processes and the some background on safety management systems, and then to go into the MBTA's targets. I'll come back and cover targets for the RTAs, and we do have representatives from both MWRTA and CADA here today to answer any questions you have. We'll talk about next steps and opportunities that come out of this process, and then we're happy to take questions and bring back up the requested action for today. Next slide, please. So again, as we've talked a little bit about earlier this year, these are the federal performance areas for which states, MPOs, and transit agencies must meet performance requirements. They include safety, asset condition, system performance, and congestion and air quality. Today we'll be talking specifically about transit safety, which, as Tegan mentioned during her initial comments at the start of the meeting, is a new area for the MPO in terms of performance management. A number of the other areas like roadway safety and transit asset condition are things we've talked about for a few years now. And this presentation will be the last of the performance presentations planned for this early calendar year 2021. Next slide, please. So I just want to recap some of the general resources about the MPO's performance-based planning and programming process. I've added a little bit to this material. One important resource, of course, is the performance-based planning and programming webpage on the MPO's website. Includes general information about the MPO's process. The image shown on the far left here is a cover of a guidebook that we have about that process on that page. We have memoranda describing the MPO's current and past performance targets, as well as a link to the MPO's performance dashboard. And in our transportation improvement program document that we prepare each year, we do include a chapter on performance analysis, which is chapter 4. That chapter details the MPO's performance targets, as well as the ways that we think that the projects programmed in the TIP will advance progress in those various performance areas. And we will soon be producing a new version of that chapter to capture the projects included in the federal fiscal years 22 through 26 TIP. And then finally, to reflect the Commonwealth's performance management activities, there is the Massdot tracker report and dashboard. These cover not only measures and performance information that the Commonwealth needs to report to the federal government, but information for the Massachusetts legislature as well. And you can find some of the information we're talking about here reflected in the MBTA and transit sections of that dashboard as well. Next slide, please. So now just to cover a few general basics about these requirements. As I mentioned, one of the driving reasons behind these new requirements is to support transit agencies as they're incorporating this new safety management approach, safety management systems, in order to improve safety outcomes on transit systems nationwide. So related to this, transit agencies or states that are supporting them develop agency safety plans that describe the ways that these agencies are going to implement SMS. And Matthew will talk a bit more about that as part of his presentation. And part of these plans includes performance targets that these agencies need to set for a series of federally required measures. Much like requirements related to transit asset management, which we talked about back in January, MPOs set transit safety targets for their regions in collaboration with the agencies that provide service there. They consider transit capital programming in the context of safety performance, and they incorporate information about the expected improvements that projects may make on transit safety outcomes in their planning documents, such as the Long-Range Transportation Plan and the TIP. Next slide, please. So this is just a recap of the general sequence of work that's done on these transit safety measures and targets. First, the US DOT establishes the relevant requirements, and the measures themselves are set as part of the National Public Transportation Safety Plan, which was first released in 2017. From there, transit agencies set targets for those safety measures. And as I mentioned, we'll be talking specifically about the MBTA, MWRTA, and CADA on behalf of our region. And then MPOs work with these transit agencies, or if relevant, their state sponsors, to set targets for the region. Next slide, please. So this is just a quick overview of the safety performance measures we'll be talking about in more detail today. They include 4 areas: fatalities, injuries, safety events, and system reliability. For the first 3, we look at both at the number of those instances, being fatalities, injuries, or safety events, as well as their rate per vehicle revenue miles provided by each transit mode. And there's more information about the specifics of those measures in the memorandum for today's meeting, and that information starts on page 7. In general, we want all of these measures to get as close to 0 as they can. The system reliability measure is a little different. It captures the vehicle revenue miles traveled by mode per major mechanical failure. So the idea here is we want those major mechanical failures to be, of course, very rare, non-existent. And so the revenue service that's provided, we want that to increase. So we want that mileage number to go up. As noted at the bottom of the slide, with the rate measures, transit agencies have some latitude for how they want to express the vehicle revenue miles denominator for those measures. That may depend on their service. Some may choose to express it per 1 million vehicle revenue miles of service. Others may express it per 100,000 vehicle revenue miles. So that can vary by agency. Next slide, please. So a little bit more about the targets specifically. In general, the targets we're talking about today reflect a 1-year time frame. Transit agencies are responsible for revisiting these every year as they produce annual updates for their agency safety plans. The targets that the agencies set are based on the modal service that they provide, historic data on safety outcomes, their local operating context, and planned policies, investments, and strategies they have for improving safety. Like the transit asset management targets we talked about earlier this year, there aren't any rewards or penalties from FTA for transit agencies, states, or MPOs, depending on whether these targets are met or not. As I mentioned, when proposing regional targets, we've incorporated targets from the transit agencies directly. They are listed separately as their agency-specific target setting approaches varied somewhat, and we'll talk a little bit more about that going further into the presentation. At this point, I'd like to turn things over to Matthew D. Donato to cover safety information pertaining to the MBTA.
All right, thank you, Michelle. And thank you to the MPO board. Good morning, I'm Matthew Donato, the Deputy Director of Safety Oversight and Planning in the MBTA Safety Department. As Michelle mentioned, I'm gonna talk a bit about the transit performance targets and where this is all coming from in relationship to the development of the transit safety plan and transit's movement towards an SMS-based safety program. So in July of 2018, the FTA published Rule 49 CFR 673, which is the Public Transportation Agency Safety Plan Rule, which formally requires public transportation systems to develop an agency safety plan based on safety management system or an SMS approach. This new rule moves us away from the system safety approach and adopts an SMS model. Similar to what's been implemented in aviation for over a decade at this point. So instead of an old compliance-based approach, it really focuses more on performance. So one of the simplest ways to describe it would be in terms of something like a drug and alcohol program. Previously, under the system safety approach, you're required to maintain a drug and alcohol program, test a certain percentage of people, and once you've done that, you've fulfilled the requirements of the rule. Under an SMS approach, you need to analyze and work towards continuous improvement. So once you've completed your testing, you need to look at the results. Are your positive results in line with what you're expecting? And have they been increasing or have they been decreasing? And if they have been increasing, can you identify why and what corrective actions you can take to control that change? So the simple act of complying with the rule is no longer enough. You can't just check the box. You need to analyze, set goals, and move toward improvement. So that's the overarching idea behind SMS, and I'll talk a little bit about the nuts and bolts of it. The established formal definition is that it's a formal top-down organization-wide data-driven approach to managing safety risk. And there are 4 main components. The first one's safety management policy. This is where leadership sets the tone with a policy statement, which expresses our commitment to safety, our safety goals and objectives, as well as the responsibilities for all employees. It's also where we create accountabilities right from the top with an accountable executive, which is a single identifiable person responsible for implementation of both the SMS program and also the transit asset management program. So that person has to have control over both the human and the capital resources to support these programs. So for the MBTA, our accountable executive is the general manager, Steve Poptak. After that, you have safety risk management, which is how we manage safety risk. So how we identify hazards and analyze, assess, and develop mitigations for those risks. Looking at the probability and severity of hazards to perform a risk assessment, and based on the result, developing mitigations to control those risks to an acceptable level. It focuses on identifying hazards throughout the system. So in your day-to-day operations, as well as anytime you make changes to the system, such as when you're bringing on new vehicle procurements or system extensions like we have going on right now with the Green Line extension, or even run-of-the-mill rule changes. All these things need to be examined to determine any associated risks. Then you have safety assurance, which along with safety risk management creates the continuous loop that drives the SMS process. It focuses heavily on system monitoring and data collection to ensure that objectives are being met and our mitigations are having their intended impact. And this is where the performance measures and targets that we're going to discuss sit. Performance measurement's key because it's hard to get somewhere if you don't know where you're starting from. With safety assurance, the general idea is that when you put a mitigation in place, you monitor it to ensure that it's having the intended outcome. And then finally, there's safety promotion, which focuses on building a strong safety culture through communication and training. So ensuring people have the knowledge and tools they need to make the system work. One of the most crucial pieces of an effective SMS program is an engaged workforce. No one knows the hazards of their workplace better than the people that work there every day. And that's why leveraging that knowledge and giving people the means to communicate and report issues is so crucial to an effective SMS program. So that's the crash course in SMS, which is really at the heart of the transit safety plan and by extension, the performance targets that we'll discuss. One thing to understand is that this doesn't happen overnight. An effective and mature SMS program takes years to develop and implement. And so the MBTA's SMS system is really in many ways in its infancy. We exited phase 1 of our implementation in July of last year when we finished development of our transit safety plan and when it was approved by the general manager, the Fiscal Management Control Board, and the Department of Public Utilities. And we're currently in phase 2, which is built around developing and refining our safety risk management processes. So we're really in this for the long haul. So to link it back to something you're likely a bit more familiar with, the transit safety plan and the transit asset management program actually work hand in hand with one another. Both are overseen by the accountable executive, so the general manager has access to all this information to assist in decision-making. Additionally, the targets and state of good repair information that comes from the transit asset management also feeds into the SMS program. So the condition assessments need to be analyzed for associated risks and also support safety assurance for the purpose of continuous improvement. So one example of the interplay between safety and transit asset management is in the capital improvement plan. So MBTA safety reviews all the capital improvement project charters, and we assign scoring. The scoring rubric, which we have up there, just to sort of illustrate it, you don't feel like you have to read it all. But the general idea is that more points are assigned based on the risk assessment that comes out of safety risk management and the supporting safety assurance system data and monitoring. So if the project addresses a high rated risk, it'll get more priority. So again, this kind of underscores the importance of effective data collection and performance measuring. How do you know where your problems are if you aren't collecting the data? So this was a long way of getting around to why we measure safety performance and setting targets and why it's so important. So to support the safety plan rule, the FTA mandated certain safety performance measures that all authorities need to track and develop targets for, which have to be maintained in the transit safety plan as well as updated annually. But beyond the federal requirements, without performance measures and targets, you're hampering your decision making because you don't necessarily have the data to make the right decisions. So to make SMS work, you need that data to feed into the system and drive continuous improvement, which is at the heart of SMS. So for the purposes of the safety performance measures in the transit safety plan, 49 CFR 673 refers to the 2017 National Public Transportation Safety Plan, like Michelle mentioned, and it lays out 4 key performance measures that we need to maintain and set targets for, as well as share those safety performance targets with the MPO. The targets can seem a little basic. As an example, they're all sort of lagging indicators. But this, again, is the first iteration, and the FTA has said that they intend to further develop these in the future by adding additional leading indicators. They also wanted to rely on measures that are applied to all modes of public transportation, utilizing data currently collected in the National Transit Database. That way, the measures could potentially be comparable across agencies. So for us at the MBTA, these targets are for heavy rail, which is made up of the red, orange, and blue lines, light rail, which is the green line and the Mattapan trolley, bus, and then paratransit, which is more commonly referred to as the ride. Also note that the measures don't include commuter rail because they fall outside of the FTA oversight. They're overseen by the FRA, and ferry, which falls under Coast Guard oversight. So the 4 measures themselves are fatalities is one, which is any deaths that occur on property or within 30 days of a safety event, which could be like a collision, a derailment, fire, a hazard, or hazardous material spill. But it excludes deaths related to suicide, trespassing, illness, or other natural causes. And those rates are, we express both a total value and a rate per million vehicle revenue miles. Then for injuries, it's defined as harm on our property resulting in immediate medical transport from the scene, and it excludes any assault-related injuries. And that one, we also have a total value and a rate per million vehicle revenue miles. And then we have system reliability, which is the mean distance between major mechanical failures, which is the vehicle revenue miles divided by the number of major mechanical failures. So this is the metric that can seem the most divorced from safety, but it's the FTA's way of driving a relationship between safety and asset condition. And then we have safety events, which are incidents meeting NTD major reporting thresholds. This one's a little complicated because you have to have some familiarity with the NTD major reporting thresholds to really understand it. But it compiles all the collisions, derailments, any evacuations due to life safety reasons, any of those sorts of events into one count. And again, it's expressed as both a total and as a rate per million vehicle revenue miles. So for our target setting, we first started with information collection. We looked at industry best practices and what other peer organizations were doing, as well as guidance from Mbta and the FTA itself. Once we decided what the performance targets would best support our objectives, we started diving into the data. So we reviewed 3 years of historical data to build a baseline of performance and see how performance had been changing year over year. The FTA gives a lot of latitude in exactly how transit agencies develop their targets. We developed our targets around the calendar year, since that's how we report the data to NTD and how NTD publishes their safety data. That way we can maintain parity between our performance and what gets reported out in NTD. However, some other agencies have decided to base theirs around the fiscal year instead of the calendar year. Both are acceptable in the FTA's eyes. Then using our baseline data, our year-over-year comparisons, and the guidance provided by the FTA, we set our specific targets, which we wanted to ensure were both aspirational, but also attainable. So these are the performance targets themselves, and we'll talk about how we set them. So for fatalities, we set the goal at a move towards zero. We certainly don't feel that any fatalities are acceptable. And in consultation with the FTA, they've previously said that strive towards zero is an acceptable goal from their perspective as well. For injuries, we set the goal of a 5% reduction in injuries, which is largely driven by system-wide improvements that have been going on, including procurement of new vehicles, track replacement for smoother rides, and station and accessibility improvements. For safety events, we set the goal of a 5% reduction in safety events through reactive and proactive risk assessments and mitigations. We've recently made improvements to our incident investigation processes so we can better identify probable causes and development of corrective actions to reduce the reoccurrence of incidents. And then for system reliability, on heavy rail, we look to improve over our 2019 performance with a move towards a 3-year average of 47,000 miles between failures. That's largely driven by new vehicle procurement. We're sort of trying to strike a balance between some of the aging vehicles while we're bringing on new vehicles at the same time. On light rail, we're also looking to improve over our 2019 performance with a move toward the 3-year average of 7,000 miles between failures. Again, that's also driven by new vehicle procurement, as well as overhaul of some of our older Green Line Type 7 vehicles and the legacy Mattapan trolleys. For a bus, there were some new vehicle procurements and changes to established maintenance practices that were anticipated to impact the mean miles between failure. So in collaboration with our vehicle maintenance department, we set the goal at 18,000 miles between failure. And then for the ride, we're also moving toward the 3-year average, so 66,000 miles between failures. Again, in all these cases, we tried to balance developing aggressive goals while still being attainable, and we'll continue to track our performance and adjust our targets appropriately. So how can the MPO help us get there? Really, it's about increasing coordination with Mbta safety for prioritization and decision-making. You know, a key purpose of collecting all this supporting data is to ensure we're making informed decisions. So coordinating with Mbta safety on the MPO transit modernization program, as well as utilizing the safety data to coordinate and support projects that improve multimodal safety. So I know that's, like I said, there's a lot of context behind the transit safety plan and all that, that I was trying to give justice to. I know it's a lot to throw at you, so thank you for bearing with me. And I'll turn it back over to Michelle.
Well, thanks very much for covering that material, Matt. I want to go through the information pertaining to the RTAs and then close out with some information about next steps and the requested action. So one thing I'll highlight with the RTA agency safety plans, they touch on the general SMS themes that Matthew was referring to, things like roles and responsibilities related to safety at the respective agencies, the processes and strategies they use to assess and manage risk, the policies they have for their employees around training and reporting, things of that nature. So if you want to learn more about their approaches, they're documented in those plans. Next slide, please. So kind of following the format of the safety targets Matthew just presented, this is the information pertaining to CADA. They set their targets according to a state fiscal year. I believe there is an error on this slide. Their rate values are set per 1 million vehicle miles traveled. So I apologize for that error on this slide. So if you want to follow along in the memo, there's information about these targets reflected on page 11, and some relevant historic data is shown in table 4 on page 10. In general, CADA used past data and averages as the basis for determining its transit safety performance targets. In particular, it was attentive to instances over the years when agencies, when injuries and safety events, while very rare for the agency on both their fixed route and demand response systems are rare, they did look at cases where they did happen as a basis for setting targets they felt would be attainable. So you can see here fatalities and fatality rate, like the Mbta, have been set to 0. CADA has not had any fatalities on its system going back to at least 2016 and possibly earlier than that. You know, injuries and safety events are relatively minimal, and the system reliability values are pretty comparable to the level of performance that's happening today. Next slide, please. So for the Metro West Regional Transit Authority, like CADA, they set their targets on a state fiscal year approach for calendar year 2021. These targets are reflected in table 8 on page 13. Past data for MWRTA is shown in tables 6 and 7 on page 12. And this MWRTA in particular did use the 100,000 vehicle revenue miles as the denominator for its rate targets. They considered past safety data, including data that's reported by the RTAs to Massdot annually when setting its targets, particularly around safety events rates, and they're looking to set targets that are attainable as well. So as you can see, like CADA, fatalities and fatality rate have been set to 0. Again, they haven't had fatalities on their systems going back to at least 2016. And like CADA, injuries and safety events, a little higher but attainable, and their system reliability values are relatively comparable to what's on their system today. Next slide, please. And I will mention that representatives from CADA and MWRTA are in the audience should you have any questions for them. So in his presentation, Matthew touched on a couple of the aspects of improving transit safety. You know, he talked about the capital improvement program, the CIP, and their you know, approach to connecting transit asset management to transit safety improvement. You know, of course, the CIP reflects both the sizing of programs oriented towards improving safety and asset condition on the MW and the T and the RTAs, There are several programs, I believe, that connect to that topic. Of course, there's scoring for individual projects as well. And of course, at the MPO, we can consider the investments that these agencies propose for inclusion in their upcoming TIP. For example, I believe back in March, the preliminary programming for CADA and MWRTA was posted for the MPO. And those program lists include things like preventative maintenance and vehicle replacements that support asset condition and its role in improving safety outcomes. And of course, as Matt mentioned, there's opportunities to address safety through the MPO's discretionary dollars as well. The transit modernization program is a standout example of that, as we're working towards fleshing out that program and programming specific projects using the dollars that are allocated. The TIP criteria that the MPO approved back in October of 2020 does include some safety criteria for the transit modernization program, which does mirror the criteria that MBTA safety staff look at when they're reviewing project charters. And of course, the MPO, in just making general roadway investments designed to improve safety for all users, is in turn supporting buses that travel on those roadways as well in terms of improving safety. Next slide, please. So to conclude, staff is requesting that the MPO move to support this set of transit agency safety targets as presented. And the next step for us will be to incorporate this information and the relationship between planned investments in the TIP and these measures and targets into the TIP document that will be released later this spring. So I thank you all for your attention, and I'm happy to take any questions.
All right, thanks, Michelle and Matt. Can I get a motion and a second to approve for the approval of the safety targets for the MBTA, CADA, and Metro West RTA, and then we'll open up to questions. So 2 hands are raised. I can't see who they are, Matt.
Brian Kane.
Brian Kane, go ahead.
I move approval, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Brian.
And Eric Barassa.
Eric, go ahead, please.
I second that motion.
All right, anyone have any questions for either Michelle or Matt? Daniel, go ahead.
Hi, thank you. I have a question about the things that are excluded, particularly from the fatality reporting. I guess I'm trying to understand why, or trying to understand other bits of it. I can understand somebody dying on a train or something, natural causes of heart attack or something like that. I don't quite understand the trespassing, why that is excluded, or maybe you can explain a little bit more. So I'm thinking of if it's a heavy rail, somebody is crossing the tracks at a location perhaps where there should be some kind of fencing around the tracks to prevent that type of activity. So I can understand some of the other pieces of it, like somebody, I don't know, jumping in front of a subway train or something along those lines. But if there's like an issue where there's trespassing occurring that could be mitigated or prevented by some action of the rail corridor owner or operator, what is, I'm just trying to understand how that fits into this.
Yeah, that's a good question, and it came out of particular guidance from the FTA. Obviously, we still track internally any fatality regardless of cause, and investigate and follow up on it. But as far as national reporting, the FTA specifically called those out for exclusion.
Okay, so I'm just trying to, obviously something that would be investigated at the local level, but just not for reporting purposes is not, for some reason, it's not part of the requirement.
That's correct, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
All right, any other questions?
Brian Kane.
Brian, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Daniel, just to also mention the state DPU also has its own investigative requirements for anything that might happen in terms of fatalities. So this is being looked at from multiple levels. I received a briefing on this from the T and from the staff in advance, probably because they thought I'd ask a lot of questions. And I did, and I just wanted to assure my colleagues on the board that my questions were answered very thoroughly. This is a sort of required action on our part. I know that many people probably wish there was more teeth to this and more that we could do to hold, the T, CADA, and the Metro West RTA accountable. But it is really our job to sort of oversee this and ensure that in our investments, safety is a priority. I am certainly satisfied that this effort does this, and I would urge all of my colleagues to support this when the vote comes. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks, Brian. Anyone else have any questions?
Leonard Diggins.
Go ahead, Leonard.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I was invited to attend that meeting along with Mr. Kane too, as a test lead for a test run, and a lot of my questions were answered also, and I very much appreciate it. And I just wanted to request, I think at the meeting I had requested that we provide a link, or I said I was going to find the link to the Public Safety Agency Safety Plan, which is what which is kind of like the plan that has caused this plan, and I didn't see it on the website, and I'm just going to request that you put the link to it there, because I've checked it out. It's a very interesting document. I mean, even if you just read the table of contents, I think it'll be, for those of us who are into this stuff, we'll be impressed. So I think it'll be a good resource to have linked on our site. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Leonard. Anyone else? Matt, see any other hands up? I don't see any.
Seeing none.
All right, Jonathan, can you please read the roll?
Stephen Wolfle,
Yes.
John Bouchard,
John Bouchard, yes.
Jillian Linnell,
Yes.
Eric Barassa,
Eric Barassa, yes.
Brian Kane,
Brian Kane, yes.
Leonard Diggins,
Leonard Diggins, yes.
Tom Kadzis, I'll come back. Jim Fitzgerald,
Jim Fitzgerald, yes.
David Kozis,
David Kozis, yes.
Daniel Amstutz,
Daniel Amstutz, yes.
Todd Corain,
Todd Corain, yes.
Tom Bent,
Tom Bent, yes.
Sure, why don't you go ahead and do what you think's best.
Thatcher Keyser,
Thatcher Keyser votes yes.
Darlene Nguyen,
Darlene Nguyen votes yes.
Tina Cassidy,
Tina Cassidy votes yes.
Jennifer Constable,
Jennifer Constable, yes.
Peter Pelletier,
Peter Pelletier, yes.
Tom O'Rourke,
Tom O'Rourke, yes.
and I think I heard Mr. Kadzis.
Sorry about that. I had to leave for a second. Yes, thank you very much.
Okay, motion carries unanimous, Mr. Chair.
All right, thanks, Michelle and Matthew. We're on to our next agenda item, which is 13, Federal Fiscal Years 2022 to 2026 TIP Highway Element Statewide Projects. John Bouchard.
Lucky agenda item 13. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Jonathan, are you pulling up the presentation, or there we go? Are you going to be able to control this, or am I?
You will be.
Okay. Well, great. Thank you. I hope not to take up too much time. Today's discussion is about the framework that Massdot uses to identify needs and projects for the statewide programs. Today's presentation is similar to one I gave last year in April of 2020, with some needed updates, of course, based on some new programs that we recently adopted from the Transportation Bond Bill that was passed by the legislature and signed by the governor in January of this year. So I'll touch on those programs towards the end. Let's see if we're... How are we supposed to advance these slides, Jonathan?
You should just be able to use the arrow keys.
I'm trying to use the arrow keys. It's not doing anything.
Well, there we go.
There we go. We'll try it again. All right, so these are all of the statewide programs: ADA retrofits, the bridge program, bike and ped, ITS, intersection improvements, pavement, roadway reconstruction, which is stormwater, roadway improvements, which is stormwater, roadway reconstruction, which includes our major projects and design build, and our safety program. So we have our statewide programs. We do larger scale planning documents or planning level documents, such as the Strategic Highway Safety Plan, the Transportation Asset Management Plan, and then the Plan for Public Rights of Way in the Commonwealth. These are excerpts on the slide here to identify the framework of our long-term plan, where our needs are, and where we're going to be investing. First of all, on our ADA retrofits, the transition plan was drafted in 2017 and then approved by FHWA in 2018. The plan identified all ADA ramps, either missing or non-accessible within the state highway layout. Our initial total was nearly 26,000 ramps. Of those ramps, they were prioritized and ranked by our district offices, and the district list is maintained by the ADA coordinator in those individual districts. We put out various location ADA retrofit projects currently, and we have a long-term plan for that. The financing right now comes from the capital investment plan. It's on a 5-year rolling basis. We currently have $21.8 million that is programmed for ADA retrofit work in the 20 to 24 capital investment plan. This is obviously I want to call it a long range project because it's going to run out till 2032. But it's a needed plan, and getting started was a key point of starting to achieve success. Our Massdot bike and ped program started out with our healthy transportation policy in 2014. The bike and ped accommodations and our project design is incorporated wherever possible. Again, we use our district coordinators for bike and ped activities. We have a statewide transportation plan that was developed and released in May of 2019. And then what's really happened with our bike program is our bicycle program, it's really evolved into our trails team for development of projects, which establishes a combination of both STIP projects and trails grants. We focus on STIP projects based on the 4 criteria. Basically, readiness, network expansion, community connections, bicycle and pedestrian transportation plans. We look at trying to close the gaps in longer trails programs, make community connections. A lot of the programs that we get, or a lot of the projects that we get from communities, are filling in some of those gaps. They're the proponents, and then they work through the Massdot review system to incorporate those. And then we have a long-term vision where we isolate and identify connectivity or parallel routes and try to reduce the try to increase availability to biking and walkable trips. Our statewide safety program, as I said, was developed in 2018. our latest one was developed in 2018. It initiated from our 2009 highway safety improvement program eligibility guideline. Task force was established at that time. Since that time, the task force has been expanded in September of 19, and we're looking at eligible programs and projects within the strategic highway safety plan. We identify hotspot. Geez, I got a little tongue-tied today. We have hotspot intersections that are within the top 5% of the region, that are within our top 200 across the state that we get into the program. And we are nearing completion on the network screening to identify the top 5% of roadway segments based on the highway safety manual. Our systemic project eligibility must address a safety concern raised in the in the strategic highway safety plan and identified in one of those strategies. So here's the systemic project eligibility: stop control intersections, signal timing, lane departure crashes, and sign upgrades. All of our HSIP projects have to be evaluated for these safety benefits and submitted to FHWA in our annual report. And then projects for HSIP eligibility are not standalone projects. We rather integrate other safety needs with the Cmac, resurfacing, and bike ped program. Our Massdot reliability programs are our biggest investments. They start with our Transportation Asset Management Plan, which is our TAMP. That provides a roadmap for our bridge and pavement asset management practice and investment. Next year, we'll be updating the plan to include additional assets. The update will also include additional consideration for climate resiliency in our infrastructure. Seem to be frozen here. Go to the next slide. Here we go. So our Massdot pavement program, we break it down into interstate, non-interstate, which is NHS, and then the state numbered routes program. We start with a data collection analysis using our Path Runner, video log, and roughness system. We drive all the roads in the Commonwealth that are under our control and identify the needs through roughness subsystems and video and laser monitoring of our system. My slideshow keeps slowing down on me. All right. Next one. There we go. So we do, we collect data on the pavement cracking, the ride quality, rutting, and raveling on all Massdot-owned roads, all NHS roads, and all state-numbered routes. And then our pavement serviceability index is calculated based on a scale of 0 to 5, where 5 is impassable and where 0 is impassable and 5 is a perfect roadway. The data is collected by Massdot and exceeds our requirements for FHWA pavement condition, ride quality, and rutting. This is for a network level modeling and to establish a 10-year horizon based on those current conditions. So when we say network level, it's like statewide, very high level overarching identification of our needs. And then we break that down into a 2-year, 4-year, and 10-year target model. Then the targets are reviewed biennially through performance management with our Office of Performance Management and Innovation. And then those investment levels are established in the STIP and the Capital Investment Plan. And then Massdot maintains a 5-year pavement management plan funded through FHWA and non-federal aid sources. Each winter into the spring, a new year is added. We conduct a pavement summit with each of our districts and identify what the immediate needs are in the program to reassess if any of the projects need to change. And then we add that next year on and where that's going to fall and what the investment is going to be in the program. Sorry, this was working so quickly and then it just keeps bogging down on me. All right, so our project identification and selection selection. The pavement data is collected in 50-foot increments with our path runner, and then it's input into our pavement management system. And then we identify our sections of projects that we're going to do, and we put them into, increments of, as little as a half a mile up to 5 miles. Our pavement management system performs that project level analysis to determine, what's the optimum timing and treatment through an incremental cost benefit analysis. We try to attack roadways when they're still in a good to fair approach to extend their life rather than letting them fall below, fall into the fair in poor condition. And then it's a much more costly repair and upgrade versus just a simple maintenance type of operation. Our project identification and selection, we consider priorities within the program. We've developed a comprehensive list with a combination of what's worst and what's the worst first and preservation philosophies, so we can identify what is the best investment of those dollars. As I said, we kind of work with our district office annually through a pavement summit to identify those lists in condition maps and then identify any gaps in our program. Our bridge program is slightly larger than our pavement program. There were no objective background, selection criteria. In the old days, the bridges only had to be structurally deficient and eligible for federal funds. And the question was always, are we working on the right bridges? So the criteria that we've developed removes the subjectivity and ensures a consistency model across the Commonwealth. So our current system has been in place since 2008. It's based on a risk that a bridge's condition is going to, on our transportation network, is going to further deteriorate. We use a bridge management system called AASHTO, and that identifies and calculates a health index that we apply as part of our ranking of the bridges. This also allows us to rank both structurally deficient and non-structurally deficient bridges within our program and identify, preservation actions. So our prioritization framework is we identify, the condition loss, the health index, and then the highway evaluation. And then those numerical numbers are put in that criteria when we identify a ranking and a value between 0 to 100. The higher the number, the higher the priority, obviously. So our parameter descriptions, the highway evaluation factor considers, the average daily traffic, a potential detour length, the functional classification of the roadway, and, the load carrying restrictions, if any, and then deck geometry deficiency. Those items, 29, 19, 26, those are all in our in some of our AASHTO charts. That way I can refer back to them when we're looking at individual calculations. So our highway evaluation factor is, plays an important role because the longer the detour, the larger the ADT, the greater impact to the health evaluation of the roadway to those using the roadway. The final highway evaluation factor is the average of those 5 component values expressed as a percent. When we're using our prioritization system, we identify candidates for the bridge program. We look at the number of structurally deficient bridges and which ones are considered to be at their useful life. And on the federal side, we're working on the deck area of our structurally deficient bridges on the NHS system. And then we have a minimum condition threshold that we need to be below 10% of the total NHS deck area in poor condition. I'm going to get to that when I get to the next gen bridge program in a minute. So the STIP lists our framework and candidate bridges, and then we take that information based on our program goals and available funding. Obviously, the STIP needs to be fiscally constrained. We deal with that, seems like every meeting. And then we sum up all the project costs in an individual year, needs to be below the target. And then obviously we require reliability bridge cost estimates so we can make sure that we're programming and we're staying on track with our overall cost analysis. So we do bridge cost estimating as part of our inspection program. And then we identify, our future bridge condition, our future square foot bridge area, which is reported to FHWA annually, and then factor that information into our actual project costs. Then we look at our available funding, which comes from the Office of Transportation Planning, and we use that with our roadway systems and our anticipated funding for Fed aid and non-Fed aid to identify our overall program. Because some projects are, cost more, bigger bridges, we use advanced construction obligation techniques to be able to fund a project over a number of years. So here's, our strategy to developing the STIP. First, we have our statewide ranking of our bridge list, which is sorted by our district. And then we also do a secondary ranking, by the district to see what the condition is in that individual district. We identify our structurally deficient and non-SD bridges, and then off-system, on-system, or NHS. The bridges are then taken from those lists. We put projected costs for each of them, and then look at, obviously, inflation factors if we're going to program them out over future years. They're not only, we're not ranking bridges strictly, or we're not programming bridges strictly on ranking. We get district input, consider what, again, our healthy highway index is going to be if we have rerouting and the volume of traffic and how it affects sensitive receptors, schools, businesses, commerce, et cetera. And then we factor that in, and then we look at our other options from the district, which is on maintenance, connectivity, emergency response, and then local economic impacts. All of these are considered as we develop our final STIP bridge list. All right, I'm going to talk just briefly about our newer programs. First, there was the ABP. Not sure if everyone remembers that. That was the Accelerated Bridge Program, which predates myself at Massdot. And now we have the Next Gen Bridge Program. So the Accelerated Bridge Program, was a substantial down payment on modernizing Massachusetts' bridges inventory. It was a $3 billion investment coupled with new engineering, procurement, and construction techniques. We used accelerated bridge construction techniques to reduce the impact to motorists and to reduce the amount of time that the project was under construction. What the Accelerated Bridge Program did is it allowed us to do some mega projects. Obviously, Longfellow, Fall River, Braga, and Whittier bridges were some of the major bridges that we did over the last several years. This Next Gen Bridge Program, which was authorized in the recent transportation bond bill by the legislature and signed earlier this year, will ensure that those gains are sustained and the progress continues. So this graphic shows the NHS bridge deck area forecast. The red line is the target line of 10%. The blue line is our current situation to the left, 2019, 20, and 21, where we're at. And then the green dash line is our forecast based on the Next Gen Bridge Program. That will authorize $1.25 billion in new GANS money, which is Grant Anticipation Notes. The Highway Division is developing a list right now of eligible projects to be funded under this program. We're being consistent with our Federal Highway Administration guidance. Massdot and FHWA will execute a memorandum of intent that defines the parameters of this Next Gen Bridge Program. And then when the bridges are, finalized and identified, they'll be programmed and added into the 22 to 2026 STIP. So just a brief to give you a sense of our bridge condition in practical terms. Our total area of NHS bridges is 29,523,128 square feet, which essentially is 512 football fields. I guess that's an easy analogy, because everyone knows what a football field generally looks like. Our area in poor condition in Massachusetts is currently 68 football fields, and 10% of the poor area threshold is 51 football fields. So we have a gap of about 17 football fields that we're working on right now. To put in perspective, the Tobin Bridge and the Chelsea Viaduct, over to the right here, show that, that's about 7 about 7.07 football fields. Those are currently being worked on, or at least the viaduct is currently being worked on. And then you can see that Alston is on there, which is at 5 football fields. So currently in construction, we have 12 football fields with an average annual growth area of approximately 5 football fields per year. The average NHS bridge size is about 1/3 of a football field. So we're trying to get to that 10% threshold, that target, and Massdot needs to do this and bring this backlog down so we can increase our investment in other areas of the bridge program. So just for a quick review, it's a $1.25 billion program. It is leveraging our future federal authorization through grant anticipation notes, or GANs, which is similar to how we conducted the ABP program. Initial projects will be amended into the 22 to 26 STIP once they're approved. And is our projection that Next Gen Bridge program will ensure gains are sustained and progress continues in our bridge improvements. And with that, I will take any questions.
All right, questions that folks have for John. Daniel,
We've got,
go
yep.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, John. I'm not a football guy, but I think that football field analogy is helpful for conceptualizing it. Question I have about if the municipality is looking for information about bridges and whether they're Massdot bridges within their community or around the area, is there someone within like a local district office who they would contact to find, if there's a bridge, if there's interest in doing a project that is associated with a bridge that when we want to get information about, is this bridge going to be replaced soon? Where is it on this list? What's the best way to get information about that?
We have every district office has a district bridge engineer, and the community could reach out through the bridge engineer. The communities generally interact through the state aid engineer or the project development engineer on individual projects. Just to clarify, Daniel, for this program that we're talking about right now, we're still in the development stage because we're obviously identifying projects that would meet the criteria. We're trying to identify, which projects will improve on our deck area calculations and which ones need preservation, et cetera. So that's currently being worked on and is being worked through the administrator and the secretary's office right now. And then we'll be signing on, as I said, the memorandum of intent with Federal Highway Administration very soon. But a community can always contact the district bridge engineer or state aid to get information on, the current programs that are available. If they have a concern about a structure that is in their community, whether they own it or Massdot owns it, and then we can advise from there.
Great, thank you.
Sure.
All right, other questions? Anyone else have their hand raised?
Ryan Kane.
Ryan, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to support this, and this is more of a comment. I just want to let the record show that using GANs to pay for projects like this is just a horrible way of doing business. I know we have to do it, and we will do it, but the policy that this Commonwealth has to fixing its infrastructure is incredibly broken. We are using borrowed money, leveraged against future borrowed money, paying double interest to fix bridges that are falling down because we refuse to actually pay for bridges that are falling down. And I know it's no one's fault here, and I'm not asking anybody to defend it. I'm just saying, we are stuck in a position as an MPO to have to do this because there's no other way that our elected officials have given us. It's a horrible way of doing business. It costs a fortune that doesn't have to be spent of the taxpayers' money. And I will be voting for it as much as I don't want to, but eventually we have to find a way to start paying for our infrastructure with current cash dollars. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Ken Miller.
Go, Ken.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a point of clarification and a question. John, on a couple of your slides, when you were talking about the bridges, you talked about deck area in poor condition. That is not, that is a little bit, I think, misleading. The federal highway condition measure is the deck area of bridges in poor condition. So so it's not the deck area per se. That is only one of the things that can cause a bridge to be in poor condition. So if, for example, that condition, what counts towards that condition measure is a bridge that's in poor condition for any reason. So it could be the substructure or the superstructure. The deck could be in great shape and it would still count towards that. So it's the deck area of bridges in poor condition, not the deck area, not poor deck area. So on a couple of those slides, I think there was the footnote was just misleading.
I'll relook at those. Ken, apologize for my mischaracterization.
No, no, there's nothing to apologize for. I just wanted to clarify so folks understand it's not, we're not focused on the deck per se. It's just it's the condition of the bridge.
Right, right.
A second thing is for just to Daniel's question. If folks are interested, people can go to the Federal Highway website. There is it's just go infobridge.federalhighway.fhwa.dot.gov, and that is look. You can get any National Bridge Inventory information available to the public through our website. So any community can go on the Federal Highway website and have access to the National Bridge Inventory that has information about not only Massachusetts, but any state. And you can look at the condition of it based on the last inspection. You can look at the condition of bridges in your community, the whole state. There's all kinds of stuff, graphs, all kinds of stuff, the analytics available. So it's infobridge.fhwa.dot.gov. And then finally, a question. I noticed, John, on your first slide, you didn't include Cmac as one of the programs. So does the state is there still a statewide Cmac program?
There's this distinction, Ken, about program versus funding. So we use Cmac funding for different, different programs to fund it, but there's not a Cmac program per se. We use Cmac funding for our trails and our roadway reconstruction that meet those criteria, but it's not really a program, a Cmac program. It's a fine distinction, and it really takes me a lot to how you have to, it's a very fine line about it's a funding category, it's a bucket, it's a color, it's not a program.
No, I understand. I understand that, but
okay.
They a statewide CMAC program. So I was just asking.
Okay.
And then finally, I did have a question about the bike and ped program, and that is, how does the state decide which projects it's going to take on as part of its statewide bike and ped program, as opposed to leaving projects for the MPOs to fund?
Well, we have the Trails team, which has a group of folks from Massdot, from EOHED, from the Secretary's office, et cetera, that gets together on a regular basis, communities, and we identify the overall, we have the overall statewide bike and ped program and identify connectivity for trails. And then we have a full 5-year program plan that is being funded statewide. And then communities obviously also come to us with individual community projects that are evaluated based on their connectivity to the overall trail, the overall trail program, bike and ped connections, et cetera. And then those are evaluated as part of our STIP program development and our SIP development every year.
Okay, thank you.
All right, others with their hands raised. Anyone else? Matt?
Leonard Diggins.
Leonard, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Mr. Miller, you touched on something that I was going to get at. But first, I want to say great picture, Mr. Bouchard. I love it. And second is that I am really impressed by Massdot. I got involved in RTAC because I really wanted to get out, branch beyond transit. And every time I read stuff by Massdot, particularly the state highway safety plan, I'm really impressed with the amount of thought and planning that has gone on and is going on. So my question, and you consider this an invitation, it's along the lines of what Ken was getting at, is that what is it you feel that the MPO can work with Massdot in order to be, more comprehensive, continuous, and cooperative? And you don't have to answer that now, but perhaps maybe come to an advisory council meeting and have this conversation with us, because it would be good to get a better sense of how we can coordinate. So that's it. Thank you very much.
Let me add something to that, Ken, just from a Leonard, I'm sorry. I look at we try to identify projects and various programs that need to be developed. And then we have big challenges in cost estimating, which there'll now be a subcommittee in the Boston region that'll be working on. It's also something we're working, statewide, obviously. I think some partnership would be, to identify, maybe some through the long range plan, some larger projects or long range projects, and how could we come up with a plan to work them together? Because the regions don't have the money. Statewide, we don't have enough to do the whole thing. And, so we look at AC, advanced construction techniques, to program it over a number of years. I think that in the future, we're going to look at partnerships with regions as a way to achieve some of the larger projects and more important projects to a region, because they can't fully fund it, and seeing if there's a way that we can cobble a couple of things together to get things done, I think is something I see coming in the future.
Thank you.
All right, others have questions?
Seeing none.
All right, so this is actually not a voting action. There's just an update from John. So John, thank you for that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
So we are on to the agenda and member items. I just have a quick one. I'm going to turn it over to Tegan. The Innovation Conference registration is open. We are actively working in the program, which we should start. People should start seeing stuff probably early next week. So please make sure you sign up. It will be a virtual event. Tegan, why don't you go ahead?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just had a few updates, some of which happened during the meeting. And one of it is to confirm the next MPO meeting dates. You'll get this in writing as well, but just so folks can plan for it. We should have a meeting on April 29th, where we would approve the federal fiscal year 21 to 25 TIP amendments. And we'll have some other MPO business items. And then we will meet again on May 6th. And that's where you would vote for the 21-day release of the federal fiscal year 22 to 26 TIP. So the next meetings will be on April 29th and May 6th. And then also, I just want to remind folks that immediately following this meeting, we do have a UPWP committee meeting where we're discussing all the universe of study ideas. So the marathon's not quite over yet, and hope to see some of you there.
All right, any other members have any items for the MPO today?
Michelle Scott has a comment.
Michelle, go ahead.
Yeah, just really fast, responding to Len's comment at the end of the transit safety targets presentation. For those who are interested in the National Public Transportation Safety Plan, there is a link at the bottom of the April 8th page of the meeting calendar, which you can take a look at. There's, general information about not only the performance measures we talked about today, but some background about SMS and kind of nationwide past transit safety performance for those who might find that interesting. Thank you.
All right, anyone else?
Seeing none.
All right, can I get a motion and second to adjourn, please? Brian, go ahead.
Move to adjourn, Mr. Chairman.
And Eric?
Eric, go ahead.
I second that motion, but Mr. Chair, could you also give guidance on the UPWP meeting before we adjourn?
Tegan, do you want to handle that?
Yes, sorry. Let me know what you mean by guidance, Eric, but there's immediately scheduled, it was scheduled to start at 12 o'clock and run roughly 1.5 hours. It was the next UPWP committee meeting, and the intent was to really spend the time to go through and discuss the study ideas. So the link to that meeting is on the MPO calendar, same as where the MPO meeting link and the other committee links are. So you can grab it there.
Maybe we could give people 10 minutes and say we'll start at 12:15.
I will defer to my staff. I assume that can work, and it will probably work better anyway, because people will likely take a short break regardless.
Let's take a 10-minute break. We'll start at 12:15. That sounds good.
All right. Why don't we do that? So with that, we are adjourned. Thank you, everyone. We got through a lot today. And as Eric just said, UPWP in 10 minutes at 12:15. Thank you, everyone.